welcome to yet another episode of the Way Forwards podcast. Today, we have the distinct privilege of having Lieutenant General retired Bob Caslen with us. Key parts of his career that I'll just highlight where he and I crossed paths. We're on Capitol Hill. We also spent time recruiting, training, developing, and commissioning officers for the United States Army. I did it through the United States Army Cadet Command, and Bob Caslen did it through the United States Military Academy at West Point, a premier institution in our country, and one that I hope he'll explain to our audience a little bit about today. Sure, it's great to have you. If you would please give us kind of the Reader's Digest version of your illustrious career, please.
What was illustrious about my career, Chris, it's great to be with you, was the fact that I had the opportunity to serve my country. And contrary to the vast majority of my peers, it was during the Vietnam War when I was in high school that elected not to serve their country. I played football in high school. I was recruited to play football at West Point. That's how I got interested. My teachers, who've all found ways not to go to Vietnam, were trying to talk me out of going to West Point. But I said, there are a lot of opportunities. Why not? What do I have to lose? It's a free education. Mom and dad like that as well. I didn't realize that I loved the Army as much as I did. I was going to do my 5 years and get out. But once I got in the Army as an infantryman, I fell in love with my soldiers. You know, they depended on you for everything, even their personal lives and their families. And they depended on you for their training and their competence. And I never really appreciated that bond of brotherhood. Back then, there was just men in the infantry, so there was a brotherhood, and today it's a brotherhood and a sisterhood. But that bond of brotherhood was even stronger than my own blood brothers that I had. And I fell in love with the military to serve, and then I realized the passion of serving your country and the trust that your country gives you to stand in the gap and protect their country, our country, for all the craziness that's out there. So a guy that was going to serve 5 years, I ended up serving 43 years. And in my West Point class, you know, I was going to be the first one to get out and leave the military. And I ended up being the very last one to still wear a uniform after 43 years. Yes, and I went out kicking and screaming, you know, because I had to go out. I had reached my limitation. I had already got exceptions to policy to stay for a couple more years by the chief of staff of the Army and then the president of the United States. But that's because I loved the Army and everything that I was doing. My final assignment was serving as a superintendent of the United States Military Academy for 5 years, like their president. And it was a great job to transition out of the military because you invest into the future leaders of our nation, the future leaders of our military. And you have the responsibility to develop them into the men and women who will stand in the gap, protect America in the future, who will develop that trust relationship with the American people. And it was just, I loved doing that with that next generation. After I retired about 6 years ago, I worked a little bit at the University of Central Florida, was one of their executive vice presidents for a couple of years, and then I got recruited and I worked at the President of the University of South Carolina for a couple of years, and glad to talk about that experience a little bit later. That was a shock. People protested against me. I mean, they had rallies and everything. I had votes of non-confidence. I was stupid for staying there or for taking the job. I didn't realize how ugly it was, but that's another story in itself. Nevertheless, so now I'm just hanging around, loving life, and I'm in Florida. I live in a gated community on a golf course. Love to play golf. Love to go fishing. But I found out that I like retirement, but I didn't like it that much. So I decided to go back to college, and now I'm going back to college right now, getting a doctorate degree in business. So that's what I'm doing right now. And I'm working, you know, with a couple of leadership development firms, mostly to take corporate executives on leadership development training opportunities to Gettysburg, the Battle of Gettysburg, and also to Normandy, because you walk those battlefields and you don't necessarily learn the military tactic, you learn the leadership of that event And because those leadership principles are universal, and then you really have that really reflective, intense dialogue on how does that leadership lesson apply to my business.
Yep.
So my job is to not so much to be the historian, but to be the facilitator of describing the leadership lesson and get it out of them on how that applies to their business and how they can be better as a result.
Exactly. And here at the Way Forward, we talk about, we can give you examples like that. It's not about the tactics. It's not about whatever the situation really was. It was, where was the leader? What did the leader do? And how did those they led follow them? And where was the trust or not? And I think that's a huge, great example to give there. Sure, I got to ask you about your office. Every leader we talk to has got something behind them that they hold near and dear to their heart. There's very few things that make the cut in retirement, and you have three things behind you. Can you give us a quick spiel on why those are behind you? Of all the stuff, I'm sure you have a basement or a room somewhere with over 100 to 200 things that were given to you over your 43-year career, saying thank you for doing this for us. But you've chosen those three things. Why is that, sir?
Well, if I move my camera around, you'll see a whole bunch more on the other side of the room as well. But the ones that are behind me, well, actually the football jersey with the 25 on it was a going away present for my aide and executive when I left the division command of the 25th Division, which is Tropic Lightning. And the reason they gave me a football jersey is because I played football at West Point. I actually, as a young captain, was an assistant coach at West Point. And I was instrumental in finding the new coach that finally turned the program around and started beating Navy again, finally. Hurrah. And so they know that football was an important part of my life, and they decided to give me a football jersey with 25 on it. The other one there over my left shoulder is the Battle of Anaconda in Afghanistan, the early days, and after we went in there with some special forces, the 1st Conventional Unit was the 10th Mountain Division. I was with them and joined them right after Anaconda. But and it was the early part of going to war in Afghanistan after 9/11. And that was a very influential mission that we had. Iraq hadn't started yet, and we were in the middle of Afghanistan after what had happened in 9/11. And speaking of 9/11, I was in the Pentagon 9/11, and the one up here, back there, yeah, right there. That one is the Pentagon. A good friend of mine took a picture of the Pentagon on 9/11. He had walked outside and started taking pictures. You can't really see it, but the picture is so unique because it shows the building that had collapsed. He had taken the picture soon after the building collapsed. It was a sunny day that day, but when he took the picture, the smoke, which was obscuring the sun, separated, creating a ray of light. And the ray of light shone through where the smoke had separated, right on where it had collapsed. And in the midst of the collapse, what part of the outer ring was an office of a Marine general, and inside his office was the American flag. The office collapsed, but the American flag didn't. So you have a ray of light in the midst of this crisis and this tragedy shining on the American flag in the middle of all of that debris. It's just a beautiful. I've taken that picture with me because it's a great metaphor, but it's so symbolic of you can do whatever you want to America, man, but you're not going to ever take us down, and we have the tenacity and resilience to respond as we did after 9/11.
That's a beautiful story. And it's interesting. I spoke to a graduating class this morning at their rehearsal, and then I enlisted 3 young men going into the Army. And it occurred to me that they were not even alive, by years, weren't even alive during 9/11. And it doesn't seem for me that it was that long ago. And I think what that has done for me, you came in right at right at the very, very edge of the end of Vietnam. And my generation grew up not having served there. And it seemed like that was years and years and years ago, that it was old news when I was a young lieutenant. But now I look at it in a reflection, it's like, man, it was a lot closer than we are to 9/11 today, in terms of it being over 21 years ago where we invaded Iraq. And 20, plus 23 years since 9/11. So yeah, well, I'm glad to see you have that. I think a lot of us have those. I've got a piece of the Pentagon that was presented to me when I was in the Pentagon a couple of years after that, a person went out and got pieces of it and memorialized them and then gave them to people that he respected. So near and dear to the heart. Thanks for sharing that with us, sir. And Anaconda was a very significant battle campaign throughout portions of Afghanistan. So here we are today. You've done all that stuff. You've been there, you've done that. You got your academy's degrees, your education throughout the Army. You're working on your doctoral degree today. Yet another thing that you and I have in common. Here we are at our age, and we still have the urge to learn. We have this lifelong learning thing going. I now feel inadequate to brag about it being 63, now that you're 48. Why are you doing it, sir? What's the motivator for you to continue to develop and educate yourself when you're retired? Shouldn't you be fishing or playing golf? What the heck?
Well, I'm on the board of trustees for Salem University in West Virginia, and I have the GI Bill. And the rules of the GI Bill is you can pass it off to your children, but my children are now too old, so they don't qualify.
Yeah.
I would love if they could pass it to my grandchildren, but that's not part of the agreement. I can pass it to my wife, and she didn't want to go back to school. So I said, well, I got the GI Bill, and I've got time, and I'm a trustee of the university. And being a student gives a trustee a very unique experience on what's going on in that university. So it has really enhanced my trustee business. But nevertheless, I mean, the reason I'm doing it though is because lifelong learning, and I want to learn, and I've always wanted to get a doctorate degree, and you're always in the military, just too busy to do it. I didn't know what to expect. I'm on my last semester of coursework, and I've written the first 3 chapters of my dissertation, and I still have the research in the last 2 chapters of the dissertation to go. This time next year, if I stay on target, I should be wrapping it up.
Right.
But I've actually love it. My wife doesn't like it because I go in my hole and, study, and I don't get out of there. I come up for air every now and then, but you're not talking to me anymore. I got to write a paper,
Yeah. I'm catching some grief for that too. Exactly that. She's like, it's like we were going to go, see the kids or grandkids or something. It's like, well, I've got a paper due on Wednesday and I have a discussion on Sunday. So we have to squeeze it in between there. And she's like, why are you doing this? But, I think 2 years into it now, she's starting to understand why. And it really, for me, has been a phenomenal experience. But it goes back to, the moment I came into the Army, that is what I was taught. That's how you and I were raised, which is there's a constant requirement for your institution to develop your subordinates and your employees. And I don't see that much now that I'm out here in the civilian sector. In fact, I've worked with some CEOs who say it's not their responsibility to develop their employees. Their employees either keep up or they get rid of them and they buy a new one. I actually had a Fortune 1 CEO tell me that. He goes, I don't develop my people, Chris. I just buy new ones. And I said, well, if that's true, then why am I coaching you? And he's like, well, I'm different because I'm in charge, but my subordinates, that's their problem. And what's been interesting is working with him about a year now, I think he's starting to see the turnover and the waste of talent that he kicks to the curb, and the fear that he instills upon his other subordinates that their life cycle within his organization, although it's very lucrative, is only as long as he feels that they have value, and he's not interested in them developing. Have you seen that? What are your thoughts on that, sir?
Well, my dissertation is on that topic. It's on the leadership development programs of corporate executives, and in particular, the leadership development, the programs that develop CEOs and corporate executives, senior vice presidents and that group. And I also work with 2 leadership development firms. to work with corporate executives. So this is why I love doing this particular dissertation, because it's part of what I'm doing for a living, and and it's also my passion of developing the future leaders of our nation, which I did, which you do as a superintendent at West Point and elsewhere. But what I have not seen, and a matter of fact, all these things are going on in my mind when you just told me the story about the CEO that's not interested in developing either himself or others. I mean, I have not seen that in those, because my dissertation is going to reach out to CEOs to talk to them about leadership development, and I'd love to get that sample in my research. So if maybe someday you could pass his contact information to me if he's interested in doing an interview with me, because I'd love to get that perspective. But since you asked the question, most of the CEOs I've seen are interested in leadership development. They just don't know how to do it, and they don't know what the right program looks like. My dissertation is designed to find the best programs that are actually making a difference. And when it gets published, maybe the CEOs like the one you had just mentioned will read it and say, yeah, it not only has an impact on those who I work with, my subordinates, and me personally, but it also might have an impact on improving my business and business success as well.
Well, but so the first instinct, well, this particular individual and 3 others that I will send you their names. Actually, I'll call them first and get permission. I don't want to get into some sort of trouble. But the common complaint is time. And so if you have the perfect book that you produce from your dissertation, and it's a top, New York Times best-selling list, whatever it's called, if I offer that to some of these guys, they'll say, I don't have time. How do you work with your individuals who you're mentoring and coaching? How do you help them to understand if they don't take the time, they'll never have the time? I mean, I think what a lot of them don't realize is that they're wasting so much time the way they're doing business today, that if they stop, take a few minutes, tweak what they're doing, take some outside advice, and then become more efficient with the time they have available, they suddenly have more time, which in fact is a significant resource for people at the top. How do you get them to do that?
Well, my best example is what the Army does and what we did in the military. And when I was the commander of the Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, as one of my assignments, I had overall responsibility for the leadership development of the Army, the entire Army. So I had oversight of all the schools. And the way the Army, and I can just see how it applies to me personally and those that we have served with as leaders. What the beautiful thing about leadership development in the military is they educate you, they put you in a school, and these schools are occurring throughout your career so that they can teach you leadership skills and also competence skills in your profession. And then they put you into the operation, into the mission. So with that education background, you go into an experiential event, an experience, and then you learn based on what you were taught, and there's lessons learned that take place. And then after that experience, maybe there's another one, then you come back out and you go back into school again. So when you go back into school, 2 things happen. The first is you reflect on your experience, and the second is you get trained for the next level of leadership. Yeah. You see, so the beautiful thing about the leadership development program is it prepares you for your assignment. It gives you experiential opportunities, and then it brings you back out again so that you can reflect on what you learn, and then you get new education to prepare for the next level of leadership. And that model, or that leadership development model and process, is what has created and everybody listening to this knows that there are great leaders, and there have been great leaders in the United States military over the years. Even recently. There's some bad ones too, don't get me wrong. But, those leaders are not great because they were born great. Those leaders are great because they were developed, and they were participating in leadership development programs throughout their career path.
See, and it's interesting, most of the CEOs that I meet that say, I don't have time, are usually referred to me by their board, which goes back to your trustee comment earlier, being a trustee and taking the courses. And you and I are also trustees for the Command and General Staff College. The board will recognize that the leader needs to develop themselves. And they don't think they even have time to do it for themselves. And so when I've used the example, what you said, where you're constantly building, with the operational, go do it, get your hands dirty, be the practitioner, learn from that experience, then take them offline for a bit, educate them, give them the next set of skills that they may or may not have, or improve them, and then put them back in. And you're constantly, you're consuming your own talent is what you're doing within an organization. You're creating a talent that's working its way up, that you know what it can do, and it begins to trust you because you're investing in them. The pushback I'll get is, hey, that's great for the Army. You guys live off taxpayer dollars. You don't have to make money. You can have the optimal way of doing it. I can't afford that. I can't afford to take people off and go to school. How do I do it without, the optimal solution that you guys had with billions of dollars in the Army? Any thoughts on that, sir? How you would tell somebody they could do it? Or consider?
Yeah, most of the people I work with, you don't have to try to explain it to them because they already signed up for it, and if they're going to Gettysburg or whatever.
They're coming to you because they've already realized this. What is it about them that makes them different? How did they get in that boat? Do you know?
Well, first of all, they realize that the best organizations are those that come together as a team. And how do you build the team? And when you stop and think about how do you build the team, that brings you right into a leadership development, like an offsite or a strategic planning session or something like that. And they realize that if they have that team session, they get buy-in and ownership, not from the top being directed, with a leadership style that just directs what to take place. Mm-hmm. When they work together as a team and come up to the end state and the objective and the strategic plan as a team, then you have the entire team having ownership in it. And when the entire team has ownership in it, they have purpose and they have identity and they believe in it, and then they know why it's so important. And when you have that purpose and that identity, you don't have to wait to be told to do something. They're going to do it on their own.
I agree. And I think that's what the companies that you're working with and what we do is we try to encourage leaders to create that space. The offsites are incredible if they're done well and if they have the right agenda. Some of them that I've seen that don't work well, the CEO tries to set the agenda. The ones that work well are the ones that are designed to develop the team. And one of the big ones that I see, and I'd be curious about your perspective, is emotional intelligence. People are talking about it now. People are sorting through it, trying to figure out how to leverage it to their advantage. But I think what surprises me the most is when you start an offsite off with emotional intelligence, it's surprising how much the team doesn't first know about themselves, but more importantly, they don't understand those they've worked with, especially when they've been with each other for a long time. And, about 20 minutes into an emotional intelligence session, somebody will stop and go, I just thought Bob Caslen was a jerk. I didn't realize that this is how he thinks. This is how he, from a personality standpoint, perceives the world. As an introvert, this is how he thinks deeply about things when I'm talking, as opposed to the extrovert who's talking over somebody and staring at the introvert and getting the idea that the introvert thinks whatever they're saying is stupid. And they try to win them over and keep talking. I'm really curious about, what have you seen in terms of working with senior people? How socially aware, how personally aware of themselves, how empathetic are they? Do they understand emotional intelligence and its role in leadership?
Normally they have halfway decent people skills. But emotional intelligence goes way beyond that. It goes into the environment and understanding the environment and what are the not only the indicators, but what are the things that really generate action and activity. And how do they leverage those interpersonal skills to build loyalty, to build common understanding of a vision, of the objective, and all those sorts of things. I want to give you a military example and tell you a military story, a war story, if I can. I apologize, it's a military story, but it's a great example of intellectual intelligence in this piece here. So here I am, a division commander in northern Iraq during the surge and towards the latter part of the surge. There's still a lot of activity, and I had responsibility for Salahdin province, which is where Saddam was from, and it was a terrible province. A lot of ugliness that was going on there, particularly in the city of I forget right now, but there was where they had the Shia mosque in the middle of a Sunni area. So I had a battalion commander, and it was very hostile. A lot of fighting was going on. So the way he wanted to get at the problem in trying to understand the problem was that he found two wealthy Iraqis, and he developed a relationship with them, and he convinced them to pool their money together and create a bank. Now, there were no banks in Saddam's era, and this is the middle of a lot of fighting that's going on. So his emotional intelligence is really focusing on the environment and developing this relationship with these two guys. And they agree, and because they trusted him, they pulled their money, they started lending their money out. So there was this old dilapidated tomato paste factory that wasn't working anymore, and because it was all broken. So they approached the dilapidated tomato paste factory, gave them a loan, and he ordered the parts, and he got the tomato paste factory up and running again. So this is about, like 4 or 5 years into the Iraqi war. So no one was growing any tomatoes anymore because there was no market to bring the tomatoes to. And the farmers, because of the war and all that activity that was going on, they weren't doing any farming because all the war was taking place. But if you're going to farm in the middle of Mesopotamia, Iraq, you've got to bring water. It's irrigation. So you got to get the water out of the river into the canals and get the water out of the canals into the fields so they can grow that. They know how to do that, but all of it was damaged. And the electrical grid that was going to drive all the pumps was non-existent and hadn't been working for years. So when the tomato paste factory got up and running again, the farmer said, well, we got to start farming again, which really had an interesting impact, because since they wanted to start farming again, they were hiring people and they were taking soldiers, insurgents, enemy people out of the fight and giving them jobs to go start farming again, and they knew they had to get the irrigation system working and they had to get the canals working. So they put pressure on the local government to clean up the canals and get the electrical grid running so they can run their pumps. And the government responded. And when the government responded, the government now was, they trusted their government and not in the insurgents' alternative. Yeah. So now you have this dynamic in the insurgency and counterinsurgency where you've got trust between the government and the people because the government responded. So next thing you know, they went ahead and got the canals opened up again and the electric grid fixed, and they were pumping water into it, and they were growing tomatoes like crazy. They're putting them in the back of their Toyota pickup trucks, and they're bringing them to the dilapidated tomato paste factory. It's up and running again. And there was a whole line of trucks that had to drop their tomatoes off. And the tomato paste factory happened to be on the main highway between Baghdad and Mosul, and it was plugging the traffic, and everybody was complaining. So some entrepreneur Iraqi said, I'll fix this. I'll make a parking lot. So he plowed out a big field and made a parking lot. So as the guys were ready to drop off their tomatoes, they were hungry and tired. So next thing you know, there was a food stand, and then there was a store, and they were selling stuff. And believe it or not, some guy built a small little hotel or a motel so that the guys who were spending the nights there had a place to sleep and for the next day. So next thing you know, this place that was in the middle of a fight where everybody was just shooting, not a shot was made, and the whole area became competent and safe and secure. And that's how you fight a war in the future, without firing a shot anymore, is as seeking areas of opportunity and have the agility, the leadership agility to be able to go into that area. And even when the opportunity doesn't exist, he was smart enough to recognize where the potential of an opportunity was. He had the emotional intelligence to be able to figure that out and to go in that area. And it turned out to be a great story and a great success.
And I don't have I don't have a high degree of confidence that stories like that have been totally captured and shared with the American people. That, emotional intelligence, there's so many different things you could pick apart with that one scenario. And they got to understand, a battalion commander is an infantry battalion commander, sir.
Yep.
Yeah, so he's got 800 guys.
Yep.
He's a light infantry commander at that. So he's got a couple of trucks, and he's out in the middle of nowhere. And he's pulled on his education, which is probably back in his brain somewhere. Sun Tzu said the acme of skill in war is to win without a fight. And so he's thought, how can I win without a fight during a fight? And one commander, with the risk underwritten from his commander, took the initiative and found another way, probably still fighting, but at the same time, an equal amount of effort into, if I can solve this problem, I can make this problem go away, because you're never going to fight your way out of a problem like that. How do you've talked about how to get somebody like that, to develop somebody like that. How do you get somebody like that to trust that, if they go out there and they make a mistake, that you're going to underwrite that risk? How do you promote, as a leader, that kind of innovation and confidence in somebody that you lead?
You hit the nail on the head. If you want your organization to improve, you've got to get your subordinate leaders out of their comfort zone into areas they're uncomfortable with and unfamiliar with. When they go into those areas they're uncomfortable and unfamiliar with, they're likely to make a mistake. And your job as a leader is to underwrite that mistake as an opportunity to learn. A lot of leaders don't do that, because when they see mistakes, they react negative, and they feel they got to hold the person accountable. And you're right, we have to hold each other accountable. But making a mistake and making an honest mistake is an opportunity to learn and to grow. It's like breaking a bone. If you break a bone and it heals correctly, the bone is stronger where the break was than before the break occurred. If you push your subordinates out of their comfort zone into areas you're unfamiliar with and are likely to make a mistake, your job, commander, your job, leader, is to underwrite that mistake as an opportunity to learn and to grow and get better as a result. Those are what learning organizations are. And when you have a learning organization that really is pushing themselves and push themselves out of their comfort zone, the organization does not grow based on the talent of the leader. The organization grows based on the talent of the collective leadership of everybody, because everybody's moving it forward as a result. If that leader, on the other hand, is criticized, particularly if he's criticized for making a mistake in a public forum, he will never exercise initiative again. He will only do exactly what he's told, nothing else, because he doesn't want to go through that embarrassing experience of being humiliated because he made a mistake. Your job, leader, is to underwrite that mistake as an opportunity to learn and grow instead.
And I'll guarantee you, if I see somebody else go through that, I'm going to do the exact same thing. If I saw somebody try something and get slapped down, I will never try it either. I will only do what I'm told to do and stay within that perceived, don't get the boss in trouble kind of environment. But your generation, and I don't want to make it sound like you're that terribly older than me. You got a few years on me. But you grew out of that generation at the end of Vietnam, when our Army was struggling. We became an all-volunteer force. And your generation, the Colin Powells, the General Cavassos, all the greats, and yourself, you guys brought with you this idea of, the leader is responsible for all the good and bad in their organization. And if something good happens, I was taught very early on in my career, if something great happens, I am to say, thank you, sir, stand by and grab the soldier who actually did it or participated in it, even if it was my idea and they did it well, and drag them up and say, I would like you to give that compliment to this person because they did a tremendous job. At the same time, if we completely screwed it up, I did not bring anybody forward. I took ownership. I owned it. And I had that beat into me over and over and over again. And as I grew in the Army, I saw leaders who did that and leaders who didn't. And it was obvious to me what team I wanted to be on. because I trusted the leader. Now I knew that if I screwed it up and they took the hit for me, that they're going to go put their arm around me. We're going to go for a walk in the woods and have a conversation about, well, you tried that. I tried it. We both didn't understand that it wouldn't work. Let's not do that again. And I would say, okay, what did you learn, Chris? I learned not to do this and I learned to do that. And I think I'll try this next time. He said, great, let's do that. And then even though we had made a mistake or we had failed in some form or fashion, we already came to an agreement about how I might handle it next. And then eventually I had a guy named Albert Clark Welch, who is my hero to this day, who said, Chris, every time you fail, you get 3 new things to put in your kit bag of tricks for the future. I'll bet that young lieutenant colonel that did that for you in Iraq had a big bag of tricks that leaders along the way had helped him put in that bag for when he needed them at that particular moment in time. How did your generation come up with that? Or why do you think that became our mantra when you first came to the Army and were learning from those combat warriors from Vietnam? And if you don't have an opinion, that's okay, sir.
No, I remember, I reflect back on those days. The Army was an ugly Army at that time, because coming out of Vietnam, there were a lot of drug problems, a lot of racial problems, a lot of problems in the home front. And, I just realized, especially coming back from my football background, is we just want to build a team where everybody is accountable to each other, and we'll go wherever we got to for our buddies and our teammates, and we'll do whatever we can for them. But leaders have to hold themselves accountable. And when there's a problem in the organization, or if there's a failure in the organization, the leader is the one that takes responsibility for it. I've learned that all my life. And you're exactly right. When there is a success in the organization, the leader, so it really bothered me all my career when I saw leaders take credit for success, because it wasn't them. I mean, they may have set the climate and all that, and they probably had a big role in why it was successful. But for the benefit of the team and the benefit of the organization, you have to push that success down to those that were the ones that really made it happen. And it also shows the character of the leader, because when leaders start taking credit for success, to me, they have an ego problem. And I've seen all kinds of ego issues in leaders in my military career and even outside of it. And when there's an ego issue, it normally will take the learning opportunity away from the unit, and that unit as a learning organization will only develop based on the leader and nothing else, because the leader's ego is in the way. And I, if I look back and reflect on what kind of leadership skills were the most successful skills that were out there, it was a leader who was humble, a leader that would make sure the credit of success goes to everybody else. When something was wrong, the leader would accept responsibility, but the leader was authentic and the leader was transparent, so people didn't have to guess about who the leader was. The leader had a high set of values, values like loyalty and duty and respect, and as a result had great and strong character. And those were the type of leaders, servant leaders, the ones that were most successful, those that were authentic. Leaders that had strong and high egos were the ones that normally they would kind of peter out eventually. And because, their talents were only limited to just so far, and the organization wasn't going to carry them forward because no one wanted to be a part of it. I had a great assignment, Chris, once. I was a Bravo 6 of JRTC. I was a senior observer controller of the National Training Center in Louisiana. Not the one at NTC, the one at JRTC. That was a laboratory of leadership. These brigade commanders would come through there, and they had large organizations. And I would know right away if their rotation was going to be a successful rotation or not. And they would go, for those that are not familiar with the training centers, I mean, they would take an organization of maybe about 2,500 to 3,000 soldiers, and they would all go to that one training facility. They draw military equipment, and they would go out there and they would fight the fight for a couple of weeks. And it was a 24-hour fight. It wasn't just once in a while. And they weren't real bullets, but they were played like real bullets. They were with laser beams. And, laser beams on your rifles, laser beam on your tanks, everything else was on a laser beam. And you had all these reactors that if you were hit by a laser beam, it was like you were some type of casualty and you had to be evacuated and go through that whole drill. But I evaluated the leadership. That was my role, to mentor them. And I saw great organizations and terrible organizations. And then really it was defined if it was a learning organization or not. Yep. And those organizations that were really good were organizations where you walk in. When I walked in right away, you can see there was all kinds of communication that was taking place: formal communication, informal communication. Young sergeants were talking to majors in the Army, officers, and the major would stop and listen to him and give him the time of day. And then when it came time to brief the boss at the end of the day in the daily update, the staff was falling over themselves because they really wanted to brag to the boss what they were doing and how well it was. And it was just a pleasure to see that. And the boss was always edifying and uplifting and encouraging them and making them feel good, not about the boss, making them feel good about themselves in this particular environment. And then those organizations that were terrible, you walk in and you didn't see that buzz of activity. It was like ice. And everybody was sitting behind their computer screens and they weren't doing anything else but just sitting there. And when it came time to brief the boss at night, you knew exactly why, because nobody wanted to brief him. And the senior staff officer was stuck because he or she had to brief him because they were the senior one. And then when they briefed the boss was critical, and the boss would be critical in a public forum and just tear down their ego and just rip them apart. And that type of leadership just didn't go anywhere. And there was no learning that was going on in that organization. They were told, they only did exactly what they were told to do and nothing else. And the distinct difference between the leader and the climate that the leader creates and the learning organization, mostly driven by whether that leader has an ego that stands in the way or not. You can tell right away if it's a learning organization and that really was successful or an organization that was not successful whatsoever.
No, you're dead solid perfect, sir. And I spent 4 years at JRTC at Chappie. And so I saw 48 rotations as a coach like you. And I think it's probably what we have most in common. I can walk into anybody's office today or just walk in and listen to a meeting and go, okay, I can pretty much see what you just said. And I think what leaders like that, the poor leader or the leader who's trying to control everything, he's trying to drive everything, the person who thinks if you just do it the way I'm telling you to do it, everything will be perfect, not allowing for any innovation, adaptability, or anybody to get outside the box. They're all crammed in the box. When you're growing up in an organization like that, you can see it immediately and you respond to it. You walk into an organization where it's the first one you described, you immediately feel the weight lifted off your chest and you feel that, wow, I got to up my game to be on this team because this team's moving and shaking. And I was explaining something to a fairly senior person not too long ago. When I walked into their office and I sat down, I was with them for about 4 to 5 minutes. And I said, you are too much of a micromanager within your organization. And I'm betting you're not getting the best from your team because they're paranoid to step outside of your authority. And he goes, how on earth can you make that conclusion? And I turned and I pointed at his conference table that had about 65 notebooks on top of it, the big 2-inch binders. And I said, let me guess, those are all the projects that you have assigned to people in your organization and they have not done well with it. And you've taken away from it because you can do a better job. And he goes, yeah. I said, how's that going for you? You got 60 something of them there. How much time do you spend working on those? How quick is your organization innovative, adaptive, and moving out? He goes, oh, they're all worthless. I got to get some new people. I'm like, the problem is you. It's not your people. And so a lot of times those guys say, thanks for stopping by. I appreciate you talking to me. It's like, it's okay, because this is way too much work for me to begin with. but they have no idea the power of being vulnerable and, like you said, checking your ego at the door and realizing that, if the team does it, it's going to be a better product. It may take a little while, it may be suboptimal to what you want, but over time it becomes the colonel who figures out how to get the tomatoes planted and quit getting young kids, $10 for blown up American soldiers from the insurgency and making $12, picking tomatoes and driving them to the plant. So that's the kind of, leadership teams that we try to help produce at the Way Forward, and the stuff that you're doing in your business. What kinds of isms do you have, sir? I know there's got to be those one or two Caslen isms that have made it through 43 years, 45 years of military service, the academy and all of that. What's something that when somebody says, give me one or two pearls of wisdom, what's the things that jump out most, if you haven't already discussed them?
Oh, good gracious. Yeah, well, first of all, without pushing my faith on anybody, I try to be a man and a husband and a father, a man of faith, and my faith's important to me. And I learned my lesson. I learned my lesson the hard way. That's why I saw you in the Pentagon with Vince Brooks, that in uniform, I advocated strongly for my faith to subordinates rather than I violate all the ethics regulations. So fortunately, I survived all of that, and I learned a lot as a result of that. But still, my faith is something that's been strong to me.
Yes, sir.
The other thing, that I've learned is I say it's we, not I. We talk a lot about this. It's us. It's a team. It's not about me. Big W, small I. And I truly believe that's important. The third thing is that I think is important is we talked about this as well, is that leaders have really got to, if you want to grow and be a learning organization, you got to get out of your comfort zone and you got to go into areas you're unfamiliar and uncomfortable with. But knowing you're going to make mistakes, but the leader has got to underwrite that mistake as the opportunity to learn it. And you're going to get stronger and better as a result, and you're going to get stronger and better people. But you got to kind of underwrite that risk and learn how to do that. And I think that to some people that's very difficult because they feel that they're losing control. And when they feel that they're losing control, to me, it's a measurement of whether or not you really trust your people to be able to accomplish the job and to get it done. There's feedback mechanisms so that you can keep track of how things are progressing. So, but the fact that you are allowing that person to grow and to develop talent, it's tremendously important. And you want to be a leader of excellence. See, excellence, this is important because excellence, I define excellence as living and working to the upper level, the upper echelon of your potential. I learned when I was in those training centers that there were some great leaders, and God had really given some of those leaders tremendous leadership talent, and some maybe not as much talent. But I just realized that if you really want to develop that talent, every individual person has got to perform to the upper level of their potential. And if you perform to the upper level of your potential, you're pushing yourself out of average. And when you perform to the upper level of your potential, you're going into areas you're uncomfortable and unfamiliar with, like I said before, and you're likely to make a mistake. Your leader, your responsibility is by pushing those people out of their comfort zone so that when they get into that area that they're uncomfortable and unfamiliar with, and they're in there enough times and they made enough mistakes, now that becomes a new norm for them. That becomes their new average. And they slowly get better and better and better as a result. And I just think that's one of the things that, if you really want to develop subordinates, that's one of the things you really need to do. The other thing a leader's got to do is they got to make sure that they're bringing the right people on their team. A lot of times they bring some, they bring people on for various reasons. But, Jim Collins wrote the book Good to Great. He says you got to make sure you have the right people on the bus. And there it is. I mean, that's true. I mean, particularly in senior level positions, you really got to make sure that you got the right people on your team and you got the right people on the bus. It's one thing to develop them, and I've always believed that my first reaction is always to develop somebody. But at some particular point, if I realize that they either don't have the desire or they don't have the skill set and never can develop the skill set, you've got to replace them, or you've got to find someone that can do that job or that task. When you realize they don't have the skill set to be able to do it and will never develop the skill set, you've got to recognize when that occurs and remove them, not out of the organization, because they can probably perform to a skill set in the organization that's better than what you have them doing right now, and then get somebody in there that can do it. So have the right people on the bus. And I think that's important. There's a whole ton of other isms and stuff I can add as well.
Well, I'm going to add one for you that us younger guys have always admired you for, and that's your presence at the right place and being the person who set the great example. I think the one that impressed me the most, it was at the latter part of our careers, because we both retired at the same time, was watching you do the obstacle course at the academy with some young 20-something-year-old kid. And you took the wood to him. I was very impressed. And I remember thinking, I've got to start doing that better myself. And I did the ropes and the rappelling stuff at the cadet summer training. And I remember up there I think I was more afraid I was going to fall and look like a dumb person, and embarrass myself in front of 100 cadets. But then I thought about you, and I thought, you know what, I better step up my game and follow General Caslen's example. And I challenge our viewers I'm pretty sure you can still Google you and you doing that obstacle course, because I tried to do that one time when I was up there, and it's very, very difficult. It's an interesting challenge. Sure. Any last words for the audience that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I would. Sure, I could I could talk for a long time, Chris. I'm really honored that you have me on your program. I wonder, when I was leaving the Army and I was leaving West Point on my last assignment, one of our professors sent me a note and said, and he's a civilian professor, he was in the leadership department, and he said, General Caslen, I want to write a book on character and character development, and I need someone like you who's got all the experiences. I got the theory, because he's got his doctorate degree in leadership development. He says, I got the theory, but I need someone who's the practitioner. So would you co-author a book with me? And I said, yes, certainly, I would love to. And we actually put it together and wrote the book. It's called The Character Edge, Leading and Winning with Integrity. But the whole issue of character is so tremendously important, because the most effective ingredient of effective leadership is trust. And Stephen Covey wrote a book called The Speed of Trust. And this theory is that organizations can operate at great speed when everybody within an organization trusts each other. You don't have all the bureaucracies of you got to do this and then this and all that sort of thing. And those organizations are really efficient, effective. And trust is the secret sauce that makes it that way. And he said, trust is a function of two things: competence and character. You just think of somebody that you work for and they're not competent. And do you trust them, or do you have someone who is working for you and they're not competent? Is what I was saying before. If they're not competent, never can be, then it's time to replace them, because there's a trust issue. Likewise, character is another issue. I mean, all I have to do is look at the news anytime, any day, and you can see all kinds of character issues out there and the impact it has on your leadership. And so character becomes tremendously important. So trust is a function of character and competence. And if you really want to be a leader of character, you've got to be that leader that has a set of values, that aspires to those values, that institutes those values into the culture of the organization, that not only teaches and trains, but holds those in the organization accountable to those values. And those values are what define their character. And the character becomes the most important element that develops that trust, even more so than competence. And without character, the whole trust starts falling apart. When trust starts falling apart, the organization starts falling apart. I have been guilty of bad character. I'm not one to say that character works. I believe character is development, and I believe that when you make a mistake in character, you can recover. That's a whole nother, we can talk about that for a whole nother session altogether. But I just really believe that character is one of the most important elements in effective leadership because it develops trust. In the profession of arms, our client, whom we have to develop a trust relationship with, is the American people. All you have to do is go back and look at Vietnam when America no longer trusted their military, or even spots now and then in the news today when America questions the military's competence or the military's character. And when you have that sort of relationship in your client or in this case, American people no longer trust you in the military, that you've got a serious problem on your hands. Any business that's out there, when you look at your clients, when you look at the relationship that you have with your clients, I'll guarantee you that relationship is built on your competence and your trust, and whether they trust you or not. And when they do trust you, or if they no longer trust you, you've got a serious problem or serious issue on your hands with your clients, and you got to turn that around and really address why that trust no longer exists.
I agree. And this book you have published, and I believe that you've agreed to let us hang it on this site so people can pull it down and get a good read from it. What's it called, sir? Can you put it out for the
It's called The Character Edge: Leading and Winning with Integrity by Mike Matthews and Bob Caslen.
Excellent, sir. Congratulations. And I appreciate you sending me a copy. I'm about halfway through it, and it's very good. Very
Yeah,
well.
a lot of the stories I talked about today, you'll see in that book.
Yes, sir. Thank you. We've been privileged to have you today, sir, and we look forward to having you with us again very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it. Great being with you.